Welcome to our session today about identifying gifted learners. I am Jen Cornett, and I'm the Gifted Education Specialist for the Department of Education. And I'm so happy to talk to you today because you are a key component in helping us find gifted students in our state so that we can meet their learning needs. Before we get started today, I want to talk about the vision and the mission of the Department of Education. Our vision is to create a world-class educational system that gives students the knowledge and skills to be successful in college and the workforce and to flourish as parents and citizens. Our mission, which allows us to meet that vision, is to provide leadership through the development of policy and accountability systems so that all students are prepared to compete in a global community. We have 6 state board goals that are connected to our 5-year strategic plan, and they are 1, all students are proficient and showing growth in all assessed areas. 2, every student graduates from high school and is ready for college and career. 3, every child has access to a high-quality early childhood program. 4, every school has effective teachers and leaders. 5, every community effectively uses a world-class data system to improve student outcomes. And 6, every school has and district is rated a C or higher. So we want to start today by talking about development. So most children develop at a pretty regulated rate of speed. As their academic areas grow, so do their fine motor and their social skills and their verbal skills. It's all kind of harmonious and it happens about the same time. For gifted children, they are actually defined by asynchronous development. And what that means is their academic abilities or their verbal talents or their problem-solving skills kind of outpace their fine motor and their emotional and social skills, which means that gifted children may have the ability to carry on the conversation with an adult, but then they can be very highly sensitive, or a child who can spend all day doing puzzles that are far outside their age range may not be able to tie their shoes. All of this is based on the way that the brain of a gifted child develops. The gifted brain is remarkably intense. It diffuses metabolizers, which fuel the brain really efficiently, and brain activity is planned and complex, and it requires the coordination of visual, spatial, verbal, and sensory areas of the brain. So the gifted brain is kind of like a supercomputer that's working faster than maybe the average brain. Because of this, the gifted brain has enhanced activation, enhanced awareness, and strong initial impressions. A lot of people like to think of that as a photographic memory, but I think about it more as like a memory that's embossed on the brain, because it's not just an image, it's something you can see and feel, and you really carry it with you. Because of this, gifted children can have really intense and vivid recollections and increased memory capacity and efficiency. So because of this, gifted children can have intense and vivid recollections. They can also have increased memory capacity and efficiency, and that really connects back to how the brain develops, because the frontal lobe of a gifted child is actually larger than that of an average brain. So the brain is actually physically different. And when we realize that the brain is physically different, then it makes sense that gifted children would approach the world in a different way and that their learning may need to be supported. Gifted thinkers don't make connections in the way that we do. They actually learn the way that flies land on a fly trap. They just move through the world and they're constantly picking things up. So because of that, they make kind of kooky and crazy associations, and they analyze things and they look at things a different way. And then their organizational skills can be really different and maybe against the norm. This is why when you talk to a gifted child, sometimes it feels like they're talking a language that you don't fully understand. So we've talked about the fact that gifted children's brains are vivid sensing, they have a huge memory, they have a great fund of knowledge, they have frequent and varied associations, and they have a greater analytic ability. But on the same side of that is sort of the areas that they need support. So gifted brains can experience sensory, emotional, and memory overload. They can be hypersensitive, and that is hypersensitive in emotions, but also physically hypersensitive. I've met students who are irritated by the imprint in a t-shirt of a tagless shirt because they're so hypersensitive. Gifted children can be disorganized, especially our creatively gifted students who don't see a purpose in mastery. They either organize things in different ways or they just don't really care about organization. A big piece to the gifted mind is distractibility, because we know that all gifted minds are distractible, and as educators, we have to determine when that distractibility is just how the brain works and how the child is moving through the world, and when it becomes a problem with how the child is learning and being successful, and that is a challenge that we have to figure out. Along with that, gifted children may have analysis paralysis, which is delayed processing. Basically, it just means that they're thinking so much and they're making so many decisions that they just get exhausted. And so that's when you see like overreactions or maybe breakdown. And then gifted children have a lot of mental fatigue. So the best way to picture this is if you have a supercomputer, that supercomputer needs a big fan to cool it down and help it keep running. Well, the gifted brain is a supercomputer, but it has the same size fan as all the other brains and all the other computers, like a smaller computer. And because of that, gifted children have to learn mindfulness and boundaries and really taking care of themselves to protect themselves from this. So now let's take a second and think about who our gifted learners are. When you're looking at your classrooms and you're looking for gifted learners, who are you identifying? Are you looking for a child who's attentive, who works hard? It's kind of that front row child. They absorb information, they complete their task, and they understand. These are the experts in our classroom, and often people think that there are gifted learners. But the truth is, these are academic thinkers and they're high achievers, and they're not actually the students who are served in our gifted programs. Now, some of our students are academically successful and some of them aren't. Some gifted children are the kind of children who ask unforeseen questions and they guess well. They select their focus. They look for a lot of control and choice. They can be really intense and passionate. They can be self-critical and they can manipulate. They like to choose what they're going to do and what they're going to study. And they seem to know the answers, which can be frustrating sometimes. These are the executives in our classroom. And executives are critical thinkers, and they are gifted learners, and they are the students who are served in our programs. Now, the thing about executives is that we want executives in our banks and to lead our communities, in our government, and we want them to be our pastors, and we want them to be our principals. We want executives in our communities as adults. But what we have to understand and own is that executives sometimes sit in a first and second grade classroom, or they're in fifth grade or eighth grade. And we have to meet them where they are, because if they're going to grow up to be those leaders that we know that they can be, we have to be part of identifying them and making sure that they get the support that they need. So another type of gifted learner is the kind of learner who seems to be daydreaming. They're very unconventional. They overflow with ideas. They improvise. They really prefer to work alone, although they will work happily with other people. They like to improve and streamline things. They seem to be never finished. They are the inventors in our classrooms. And these are also creative thinkers. So these are the kind of students that you buy a laundry basket for and stick it under their desk as the papers and the pencils and the colored pencils and everything falls into the basket, because you know that they're never actually going to make it into the place where their papers are supposed to be turned in. These are also gifted learners. These are creative thinkers, and they are also served in our program. So I have some characteristics of gifted children and that connect to their development that I want to share with you. So they can be early readers. Gifted children are curious and self-critical. They can be really skeptical and persistent if they're interested. On the creative side, they have the ability for imagination and fantasy. They can be intuitive in a way that other students are not. They can have an open attitude and a social behavior. They really can be social unicorns because they don't tend to have, some gifted children don't tend to have really deep relationships, and yet they kind of have like a pack of kids who follow them because they're always up to something and they always have a great idea. The next piece is the affective piece. So gifted children have a real emotional depth and intensity, and they actually can sometimes appear to be kind of emotionally immature, and that connects back to their development. They have high expectations of themselves and others. They have a heightened sense of awareness. They can be easily wounded and idealistic. They have a really strong sense of justice, and sometimes they know that they're different and they're just committed to being that way. They're committed to being their own person. When we look at their behaviors, because again, we've talked about that we know the brain is different, and although we cannot see the physical difference, we can see habits and these behaviors. So gifted children are spontaneous. They can have lots of enthusiasm. They can be, if they're young gifted children, they may give up a nap early. They don't need a lot of downtime. They have insatiable curiosity. They can be impulsive and very easily frustrated, have a volatile temper, and they can really be known to be nonstop talking and chattering. Before we move on, I really want to take a minute and note that as I'm describing gifted children, it's important to remember that gifted children, first and foremost, are children, and so they are going to be very unique child to child. And so while some of these characteristics may describe one child, they may not describe another child, but that doesn't negate the giftedness. So we're going to take just a second and look through this information about kind of what describes a gifted child and the maybe negative or not so great side of that. It's really important to remember that when we're talking about gifted children, these things are not separate from one another. So often people say, well, that child is gifted, but he or she does this or that. Well, the truth is, it's not they're gifted, but it's they're gifted and, or they're gifted so. So gifted children acquire and retain information quickly in very few repetitions. And so because of that, they can be impatient with others and they don't always love routine. Gifted children are always searching for significance and they are very inquisitive. Because of this, they can seem to not have a filter. They can ask embarrassing questions, or they can be the kind of kid who is interested in everything and they want to know just a little bit about all the topics. So gifted children emphasize truth and equity and fairness, and because of that, they can really carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. One of my mom's favorite stories to tell about me as a fourth grader was I came home one day crying, which wasn't that different, and I cried a lot, and I came in and she was like, why are you crying? And I said, my friends will not join my war effort. That was at the time, it was during Desert Storm. And I had decided that we should all get together and do something for our soldiers. And all my friends wanted to play kickball and I was devastated. But now I know that that was just really an indicator of my giftedness and how I approach the world. So gifted children seek to organize people and things. Because of this, they construct complicated social rules that sometimes it seems like you can never get right, and they're often seen as bossy and hard to get along with. Gifted children can have a large vocabulary and have advanced broad information if they are the verbal kind of gifted child. Because of this, they can also manipulate with words, and they may get bored with children who are their same age because they're not processing on the same level. It's important to know, though, that gifted children who are not verbally inclined may be struggling readers, and that does not negate their giftedness. It's all about how their brain developed, and that is different child to child. So gifted children can have a high expectation of themselves and of others. Because of that, they can be intolerant or really struggle with perfectionism, and they may struggle with anxiety or depression. There's actually a large correlation between giftedness and having an anxiety or depression. So gifted children can be creative and inventive. They like new ways of doing things, but because of that, they may be seen as disruptive or out of step. So the way that the gifted brain works is that it looks at a problem and it says, how can I get through this quickly so that I can spend my time doing what I want to do? But the thing is, as teachers, nobody wants to be told that they have figured out a better way to do what the assignment is. And so that's where the disruptive can come from, because you feel like a child may not want to do anything. And the truth is, they just may see it a different way because their brain sees it a different way. Gifted children can have intense concentration, really long attention spans, and persistence in areas of interest. But if they're not interested, you can't make them be interested. Because of this, they can neglect duties, and they may be seen as stubborn. So gifted children have a higher sensitivity and empathy and a desire to be accepted by others. Because of that, any kind of feedback can be seen as criticism or rejection. And so they really have to learn and be supportive in that people are trying to help them and not just criticize them. Gifted children can have high energy and be alert and eager. And because of that, they may be seen as overactive, and they may get frustrated when things aren't moving along at their own pace. Gifted children are independent. They prefer individualized work, and they're very reliant on self. Because of that, they don't often like input from others, and they can be seen as a nonconformist. It's also because of this that gifted children actually make terrible peer tutors. There's this idea that when gifted children are finished, that they should spend their time working with other students, and that could not be farther from the truth. Gifted children learn in ways that other children do not. So when they sit down to work with other children, what you end up with is two frustrated students. Gifted children have diverse interests and abilities and versatility. So because of that, they may appear to be disorganized or scattered, and they get frustrated over a lack of time. There's not enough time in the day to get done what they need to do. Gifted children are always looking for connections. And that really comes from the brain, because the brain is taking in all that information and trying to make connections. So because of that, gifted children may have a discomfort with things that are unclear or illogical, and they may not pay a lot of attention to traditions or emotions because they don't see the value in those things. They're just looking to get the job done. So gifted children, all gifted children have something that comes with their giftedness. And that is because gifted children's brains are different than other learners' brains. And a lot of times people will say, well, I was gifted, but I didn't do this, that, or the other. Well, the truth is, if a child is gifted, they do need some kind of support. One of the things to look for is imposter syndrome. This is the gifted child who always has to answer first. Their hand is always in the air, and that is because they are afraid to be found out, that they discount their ability as luck, and they are always trying to prove themselves. So it's in their brain saying, if I don't answer this first, my teacher's not going to know that I know the answer, and then I'm not really going to be worthwhile. I'm not going to be the worthwhile student that people think I am. Another piece to think about is overexcitabilities, and this can come out in a lot of different ways. So psychomotor is those kids who are constantly moving. They like to stand, they like to tap. They're kind of more than just a kinetic learner, like they may have nervous tics. Then you have children who are sensitive to touch, smell, sounds, lights. They can't tune things out. These are children who maybe seek out quiet spaces, or they might need earplugs in the classroom so they can focus on what they're getting done. Then you have students who have an emotional excitability. So for these children, happiness is elation, sadness is depression, and anger is fury, and there is no in between. So now that we've talked about identifying gifted children, I really want to talk about the referral process. Based on the information that you've just heard, are you able to identify potentially gifted students who are the students that you're looking for? Are you looking for children who are those front of the class kids? Or are you looking for the children who are maybe in the back of the class and who are swinging from the rafters and they're building forts out of the papers that you've given them? And they're creating teams and forming clubs and writing codes. What are you looking for? Where do you think your bias is? So research tells us that when we are asked to refer to someone to something that we see as a privilege or a reward, we look for traits in those people that we find in ourselves and that we want people to see in us. And so we really have to put that aside and base our referrals on the study of gifted children and their characteristics, and not who we think is a reflection of what we're proud of. So gifted referrals can come from anyone who sees gifted qualities in his students, and they can be referred them to the gifted program. All you have to do is tell your school's gifted teacher. Then we collect data. That's where we gather an objective measure and a subjective measure, and that is where you come in. You will likely complete the teacher checklist, which is the subjective measure, and it is actually an assessment tool and should be viewed that way. And that's where you're asked to rate students and their abilities. And it's really important to put aside how students are doing academically or how we feel about them, and really look at their behaviors and their possible indicators for giftedness when we do those forms. If students complete those complete that information, then parents give permission for testing. That's when IQ testing comes in, and if requirements are met, that's when they're put into the program. Once children are eligible for gifted in Mississippi, they are always eligible. So that is the end of our session for the day. I hope that you have found it so helpful. If you have questions about gifted children, you are welcome to email me or call my office at any time, and I'm happy to help you. Thanks for listening today, and have a great year.